But to the care crisis, we've heard for some weeks now about the staffing shortages in the care sector. Care homes up and down the UK have been telling us on 5 Live that they're struggling to fill vacancies. But we want to dedicate time this morning to help at home. Having a paid carer come to visit you in your home can make a huge difference to your life, especially if you're having issues getting around. And it helps keep living independently in your home a reality for thousands of people. There's a warning today, though, that new clients can't be taken on because of acute staff shortages. The National Care Forum says firms have had to turn down nearly 5,000 requests, including home care help, over the past few weeks. And we'll chat to their Chief Executive Officer, Vic Rayner, in a moment. But I want to hear from you this morning, too. Are you somebody who's just come out of hospital but can't get home care? Maybe a family member is effectively stuck in hospital or bed blocking because there's no care available to carry out that support in the home. Very keen to hear from home care workers too, whilst you're in between your rounds. What's it like out there at the moment? Please do give us your insight. What's your average day like? Text us on 85058. You can call us on 08085 906 693 or tweet at BBC 5 Live. Well, Dan Archer is also on the line with us. Dan, and you work in the sector. What do you do?
Christian, hi. We're a home care provider, so we're a domiciliary care provider. Head office in Sheffield, and we've 22 locations around the UK.
And does that mean you're a private company, that you make profits, you've got owners, or are you not-for-profit? What's the situation?
We are absolutely a private company. We choose to make less profit as an organisation in order to better look after our staff. So our vision for the business when we started it was to be carer-centric. And when we started the business 4 years ago, from my side of personal experience of poor quality care for my mum's mum, for my nan, I could see that the problems that were existing in the care sector were to do with high staff turnover and to do with the difficulty in finding care staff. So we set the business up deliberately 4 years ago to be carer-centric. So we do lots of things, I guess, which are different to most home care providers. We don't have 0-hour contracts. We have guaranteed hours contracts. We do pay our carers for drive time in between visits, whereas most providers don't.
Yeah.
In Sheffield, we're paying £12 an hour for care staff. We guarantee a 5% pay increase each year. My staff get their birthday off. After they've been with us for 12 months, we service their car for them free of charge. And we have 4 events a year, which are events that we're saying thank you to the staff and also to their families, because when someone's providing care and support for one of my clients, they're not being a mum, they're not being a sister, and so we need to say thank you to the families as well. And the last one of those we did was in July, on 26th of July. We called it Care Fest. It was a live music festival with 4 live bands and a hog roast and a beer tent and a gin tent and lots of things like that we did. We had about 300 people there to look after our staff and say thank you to them and to their families. So, we chose as a business to set ourselves up a certain way, recognising 4 years ago that the shortage of care workers in care was going to be an increasing problem, not a decreasing problem. But I've got to say, and as I said to your colleague this morning when we spoke for the first time about where we are right now, we are, I guess, the template for what the government is asking people to do, to pay staff better, to train staff better, to look after staff better. But even we would like more staff than we've got.
How much more are you paying then than the average? If you're paying £12 an hour?
So we're talking about sort of £3 an hour usually being the difference, £2 to £3 an hour being the difference. But I think that the significant difference is the drive time, Christian. This is the thing that to my experience, hardly any care providers pay their carers for drive time in between visits. And if somebody's delivering 5 hours of care over a working day, but they're doing 3 hours of driving,
yeah,
and they're not getting paid for those 3 hours, that has a significant impact on their take-home pay. So for us, we pay for that drive time as well, which means every hour, every minute of work that a carer does throughout the day, they are at least being paid for.
And has pay stagnated? I mean, I've got a text here from Andy who says, I started working in social care in 97 and was paid $16,000 a year. People doing the same job are lucky to get that now.
So I would say in the sector as a whole, yes, pay has stagnated, and I think there's a level of complexity involved in adult social care which didn't exist 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you could argue that a lot of what the sector did was sort of rich tea, biscuits, and sympathy. We were company for people. We were helping people to get up in the morning. We were helping people with breakfast. We are now quasi-nursing in many of the things that we do because of the shortage of staff in the NHS and the shortage of staff in community nursing teams. So, what goes hand in hand with an ageing population, which everybody talks about, is an ageing population who are ageing with more complex conditions, and those complex conditions are needing a greater skilled workforce in terms of adult social care. But I guess my problem with the government talking about that's where everybody wants to get to is what they're really doing is promising cake tomorrow when what we need is bread today.
And who gets their care paid for them? Because, I mean, if you're paying for it yourself, it's expensive, isn't it? People are paying over £1,000 a month.
Adult social care has never been free at the point of use. This has been a continuous frustration, I guess, for the 12 years I've been involved in the care sector, because people come out of the NHS, which is absolutely free at the point of use, into the social care sector, which is only free at the point of use for a very select few. Yeah. Now, I would echo everything Vic said in terms of the commissioning structure with local authorities. That is a fundamental problem in the care sector. As a care provider, I am required to provide care on a personalised basis. My care plans have to be person-centred. The outcomes have to be the outcomes for the individual that we're supporting. It is fundamentally wrong that councils are allowed to buy care, to commission care in bulk. You know, I'm not making sweeties. I can't mass produce the product, okay? So it's absolutely wrong that local authorities are commissioning care in bulk. What it leads to, as Vic quite rightly says, is that there are some people receiving care as a private client of a provider that does 70% of their work for the local authority, and they, as a private client, are subsidising that council contract. Now, that's a little bit like standing behind somebody in the queue in Tesco's and you paying £20 extra for your shopping to subsidise it for the person in front of you. That's morally reprehensible. I can listen to an argument all day long that as a society we all need to pay a little bit more for the care that we receive. The last person who should be subsidising a council contract is a private client, but that is what is happening. Okay. Now, if I look at my business, the thing that we decided to do was not to do that commissioned work for the council at the council's rate. And we were and we are under substantial pressure to do that because, as you quite rightly said, there are a shortage of providers. We say no to doing the council work at the council's rate because I cannot square that circle when it comes to looking after my staff. As a result of that, my private clients are paying more than a council contract, but let's be honest, the council contracts are at an unsustainable level anyway. But what my private clients are not doing is subsidising a council contract. So a little bit more per hour enables the provider to really look after the staff better. And the fix to all of this stuff is exactly the things that we're doing. Giving people proper contracts, paying people for drive time in between visits, paying people a fair wage, giving people a guaranteed pay increase each year, training people properly for the work that they do. I can compete with somebody working in retail without asking a carer to do the good thing, which is what a lot of care providers are having to do. So ours is a very morally satisfying job to do. Vic made reference to it. It is a hugely satisfying job to do, but I'm not asking them to do that for less money than they will get sitting on a checkout in a supermarket.
All right. Well, Dan, just stay there for a moment, will you? Because I want to bring in Emma, who's got in touch. And Emma, your mother needs care, doesn't she?
Yes. She's now, thank goodness, in a nursing home, and I'll explain why that. But we went through several years of the absolute nightmare of first trying to understand, then access, then actually have home care with various private and charity providers. And all I can say, it was a total nightmare for her, and it was a total nightmare for me, slightly at a distance. She was in London, I'm in Hertfordshire, to get it organised. And it began with when her needs started to creep up on her. And I think this is a fundamental problem because everybody faces this with their parents. So from going to being completely independent in her house, gradually she started to have needs. And I phoned her local authority, her London authority, and said, could someone please come and do an assessment for me? Because I could see that things were going wrong. And it started from there. They said to me, is she on benefits? I said, no. And they said, no, we can't come and do an assessment. And then at that point, you are left completely not knowing anything, starting to try to get on the grapevine to find out how you access care.
So what did you do?
I spoke to a lot of people, and there was a sort of local lady who used to offer some care to people just walking past the house who knew a neighbour who started the process of. We tried a supposed charity connected to one of the big age charities that we could buy private care of. But the biggest problem I found at first was, the carers, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising the carers. They are really devoted, they're underpaid. They have a hard job. In London, they have a very hard job because they have to go off on public transport to everybody in between the jobs, and I imagine they're not paid for that.
Well, we were just talking about that with Dan, that a lot of them aren't paid for their travel time.
That's right, and that's completely wrong, because they kind of rush, and then you see evidence in the rubbish of their sort of little grabbed snacks and things, and you feel really sorry for them. I mean, so I want to make that clear, I'm not criticising them. But the real difficulty was you would buy care by the hour, and you quickly find that an hour doesn't buy very much when you've got an elderly person who's gradually having more needs. And very often it would just end up, you start with 1 day, 1 hour a day, perhaps 3 times a week. You then find you're doing 1 hour a day. Then you find they're not eating. You find you're creeping up to 2 hours. You find you're going up to 3 hours. You find that little notes are being left when they've had to leave after an hour. Yet all this time, the money is going up from hundreds and hundreds to thousands and thousands. And you find...
What were you paying? What were you paying for a month?
Well, this is now a couple of years ago. One would be paying up to £20 an hour. So very quickly, even if when Mum was then requiring someone to feed her, to give her breakfast, lunch and dinner, but then that wouldn't include personal care because there wasn't the time. You can see that would start being £60 a day. You'd need it at the weekends, which is you pay a bit more, quite reasonably. Again, I'm not criticising the carers. And then the other terrible problem is the continuity. This poor old person, particularly when dementia starts, they don't know who's coming into their house all the time. And they find it quite frightening. And you'd beg with the private company. We worked with a pretty good private company, I would say. I would beg to get continuity in the carers. And you just wouldn't always get it. And then you'd be told, well, we've got a local authority contract, we're doing that. And then you find out later that you're paying much more, and the local authority wouldn't even help in the assessment. It's a real nightmare. And I would say, in the end, my mother's actual demise was because a carer was rushing to go to her next job, and she'd had a little fall. She wasn't hurt then, but she ended up in hospital, which led to sepsis, led to her not being able to walk, what your first person you interviewed talked about, because in hospital the elderly people get no physiotherapy, bedbound for 2 weeks, and that's how she ended up in the nursing home, which it turns out is better now because she has all-round care. She's much older now. But the home experience was a complete nightmare, and hardly a day would go past as a relative when you wouldn't get a call, oh, Mum's done this, what should I do?
Yeah.
Just
so what would your advice, Emma, be now to a friend or anyone you met who just said, oh, look, I'm now in this situation, I don't know what to do?
I think my first advice would be, look, if you possibly can, you've got the acute situation, look a bit further forward, because it's very quickly that an old person starts to decline. And think at a very early stage about maybe trying to get more care than just an hour here, an hour there, an hour everywhere, because at some stage you're going to have to. And I have heard of people who, assuming they're having to pay privately, which loads of people do, most people do, think about some people who can provide living care when the time comes. Because I think that way you build a better commitment with a care agency. If you sort of discuss in that way that we need some help now, but we might be moving to that, I think the advice I would give is get a care agency you can speak about a long-term relationship with, because ultimately you worry all the time for your relative, and the lack of continuity is just one of the worst things. I had posters up in the hall, what you have to do for Mum and what not, and how upset she would get because these strangers kept coming in, so I think that would be my advice. But definitely talk to people, get a recommendation, definitely do that.
Well, Emma, thank you so much indeed for sharing your experience. Just very briefly, Dan, what would your advice be?
Well, I think, lots of what Emma said there I can absolutely understand, because that was exactly the situation we had with my mum's mum. And a caregiver not turning for a visit ultimately led to hospitalisation, and that's how we lost my nan. So I have such sympathy for that, because it's a horrible situation to be in. But what I would say is the continuity thing, Emma is absolutely right. Yeah, that comes from staff turnover within the organisation. My staff turnover within Visiting Angels is about 1/3 of the industry average, which means my carers tend to be the same carer coming every week. Which means I can also say to my clients, if you want to choose your carer, you can choose your carer. And it also means I don't have uniforms in my business because, unfortunately, in many care businesses, the uniform is where the relationship
Well,
is.
if you can do it, why can't everybody else then?
Well, because I've taken a decision not to do the council contract work at the council contract rate, Christian. That's the reality of it. Commercially, we had to be bold enough when we started to say, no, we don't want to go and do that. What we're going to do is just the private work. My advice to anybody seeking private client private client home care would be ask the provider you're speaking to whether they also do work for the council. Because if they do, I wouldn't want to be in that organisation. I wouldn't want to be a private client knowing that some of the money was subsidising a council contract. I'd want to be, if I've got to be a private payer, I would want to be in an organisation where I know 100% of my private pay is actually going into trying to look after the care staff better.
Well, for me, it wasn't that the money. I didn't mind the subsidising because I could understand the reasons of that. It was knowing that the council clients, because it was such a big contract, were getting the first choice of the regular carer. So if someone was going to be dropped or their slot moved, it was the people who were buying it on an individual basis.
Yeah, and that itself is a problem, you see, because the local authorities wield the power of a large contract, which might be 70% of a provider's book, and so the provider makes what you could argue are bad decisions as a result of that, prioritising one person's care over another, based on the person buying rather than on the care need. But ultimately, the subsidisation of a local authority contract by you as a private client wasn't still giving enough money because of the draw that the contract from the council had to ensure that staff were paid better and that staff retention was better. That provider wasn't able to run a more stable business because they were leaking money on the work they were doing for the local authority.
Right. We must leave that there. But Dan Archer and Emma, thank you both very much indeed for joining us this morning. It's 10:33.